Sorry, mate, I just left a piece of paper in my office, realised it's the whole crux of the speech, but now it's going to make it all up.
So what is happening next?
I'm sure you will, my friend, I'm sure you will.
Yeah, well, we'll see. You see the Senate?
No, what?
Sarah Hanson Young pulled out a big salmon fish at this big. Salmon industry, blah, blah, blah.
What, she was promoting it or she was against promoting what they're doing?
No, against.
Sorry.
I call the member for Verena.
Thank you, Speaker. And at the outset, I want to acknowledge the tragedy that was ex-tropical cyclone Alfred. It did take a life, and we should acknowledge the fact that the soldiers, those brave troops injured in the two trucks rolling over near Tregeagle, near Lismore. And certainly we thank people who helped out at the crash site. 12 of 13 Australian Defence Force personnel injured after their military vehicles tipped over in flood-affected northern New South Wales were released from hospital the day after, but 32 soldiers, 16 per vehicle, were assisting the community in the aftermath of the ex-tropical cyclone Alfred when that crash occurred. And I don't know how many, if any, maybe all of them, were trained at 1st Recruit Training Battalion Kapooka, Blamey Barracks, Wagga Wagga, but I know the precision with which they are trained. The current Colonel, Commandant at 1RTB is Colonel Gerard Kearns, and I often say the person who fills that role has the most important job in the Australian Army, because they are training the best of the best, and whether they are on peacekeeping missions, going into combat for and on behalf of our nation and others besides, or whether they're doing the sort of work that these soldiers were embarking upon and going to, it is vital work for our nation. And we pay tribute to them. We hope that there are no long-lasting effects from the injuries sustained in that accident. I know the New South Wales Police confirmed the two ADF trucks had not collided, and investigations continue. One vehicle had left the roadway and rolled several times into a paddock. A second vehicle tipped on its side in an attempt to avoid the first vehicle. That was the early suggestions from the investigations and inquiries, but needless to say, those soldiers were on their way to do a job. Those soldiers were on their way to help out, and our soldiers are always there at the ready, prepared as they are at Wagga Wagga to do what they can for our nation. The emergency service personnel always are outstanding when these natural disasters occur, and previous speakers on this motion have mentioned the preparedness of the Christopher government, because they did put measures in place to batten down the hatches and to do what they needed to do as far as lessening the impact and lessening the damage. Now, we were fortunate that the early reports of this cyclone were not realised, that the damage caused, while significant, was not as widespread as early suggestions would have it, and that Queensland and northern New South Wales, while certainly not escaping unscathed, the actual damage wasn't as bad as first feared. That said, I know that there will be pressure now on insurers. I know that the clean-up continues. I know, and as previous speakers have also mentioned, that many people these days are underinsured or uninsured, and the government can't always be there to make up the shortfall when these sorts of crises occur, and it would be in people's best interest to ensure that not only are they insured, but that their home and contents are of an adequate level, so that if something of this nature does occur, that they are properly and sufficiently covered. I also note that many speakers have commended the Federal Emergency Services Minister, Emergency Services for Australia Minister, Senator Jenny McAllister, and I too have had a lot of contact with Senator McAllister in her capacity as Minister in that important portfolio area, and I too can inform the House that those discussions were above politics, were very professional, and she was there when I needed her. And we've had some quite severe storms go through the Riverina this summer just passed, one which hit Wagga Wagga, Downside and Cowra in January, on the 15th of January, and caused quite some damage, including the Downside Hall being almost totally demolished. Unfortunately, it had been refurbished recently, and so all of the work in that regard was almost, some people and some of the locals would argue, for naught. But thankfully, the member for Cootamundra, who was also the Shadow Minister for Crown Lands, and the state government have seen fit to get the repairs underway, and I commend them all for that. To that end, I thank the Minister for Emergency Services in the State Parliament, Jihad Dib, for also reaching out, as Senator McAllister did, on a weekend and at night, whenever was required, which I really think is very professional of him and of her, and it's the least you do expect, but still, you're able to pass it on to your constituents that ministers are on the job. To that end, I'd also like to thank Senator Perrin Davey and Gurmish Singh, the Shadow Ministers for Emergency Services in both the Federal and New South Wales Parliaments, for the work that they went to also ensure that there were people on the ground, assessors making sure they were doing what they're doing, insurers were on notice, and of course helping out in any which way they could. Speaking of insurers, the Executive Director, CEO of the Australian Insurance Council, Andrew Hall of Cowra, has also been very much at the forefront whenever I've called, and this is important because insurers and insurance companies often come under fire when these sorts of things happen, but I have to say our discussions have been fruitful, and let's hope that insurers do the right thing. Sad to say, there was a property owner, Andrew Roberts, of Mara South Road. His property, Glenrock, was severely hit. House lost its roof. He wasn't allowed to go to back to his property because of electrical fears, and because of the wiring, etc. The house was absolutely, it looked like a cyclone had ripped through it, and some might argue one had. But he was right on the boundary of the Coolamundra Shire, Wagga Wagga City Council, local government areas, and because he was on the wrong side of the boundary, wrong side so to speak, he cannot claim any of the disaster assistance relief or any of the emergency services payments, etc. because he was just on the wrong side of the boundary. Now, cyclones and storms don't discriminate. They don't follow boundary lines, and he's been left high and dry. I'd also like to mention the Hilltops local government area was hard hit on 10 February when a hailstorm whipped through Hard and Murrumbara, the twin towns in that Southwest Slopes townships. And again, the ministers came to the fore. I'd like to commend Rose Hamilton. She works at the Harden Bowling Club. She's been the licensee there for 12 years. Despite suffering extensive damage at her residence on Whitten Lane in Harden, she was there mopping up and cleaning up the bowling club. And if you saw this bowlo, the ceiling was just totally missing. The hail that hit that in that wide yet very concentrated area did so much damage. It looked like a complete snowstorm had blanketed the area when that devastation occurred that fateful afternoon. Thankfully, no one was badly hurt or indeed worse in that. But again, the State Emergency Service personnel were very, very quick to act. We see the best of Australians in the worst of times, noting that federal and state authorities stumped up a recovery centre very, very quickly at the country club in those townships, and were very quick to respond, as you would expect them to.
Thank you, Member. And I call the member for Page.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, Tropical Cyclone Alfred obviously came down the coast, as we know, and certainly affected my area. We're just an hour or so south of Brisbane and where the eye of the storm was. So just want to go through a bit of a sequence of events there. But I'll get on to what this did and the trigger this really was for the event that we had in 2022 in my region, Deputy Speaker, and some of the consequences of that and where we're still at with that. But the big difference for us, Deputy Speaker, with this tropical cyclone that was moving down the coast, unlike the event we had in 2022, is we had a lot of warning. I mean, it was 4 or 5 days that we were sort of talking about this, waiting that this might occur and happen. And I know the member for Flint here on the Central Queensland is probably saying, what were you worried about? You'd have these things all the time. But tropical cyclones aren't that common in our area. To come down that far south is unusual. They happen about every 20 or 30 years, and some of the ones that have come down have caused quite severe havoc. So we were very, very concerned about it. A lot of work, a lot of preparation went into it. So the great thing, if you like, was we were preparing for the worst, but we were certainly hoping and praying for the best. So the type of work we had, the SES, we had Scott Tanner, who started to lead the recovery of the first responders for this event. We had Brendan Moon from NEMA who arrived. We had a lot of politicians arrive from both state and federal governments, and everyone was actioning everything we could and get prepared for what may or may not happen. So the good news was, Deputy Speaker, the event hit. There was certainly a fair bit of rain. I mean, in my patch, well, on my property, Deputy Speaker, I probably had about 400 or 500 mils over 4 or 5 days, but we had breaks in between that, which meant the water could get away and the flooding wasn't severe. It was still major flooding. All rivers got to their major levels, but or major, categorisations, but certainly the water got away and there wasn't as severe damage as there could have been. To give you some perspective on this, Deputy Speaker, so in the 2022 event, and I'll talk Lismore at this stage, the flood was forecast to come through at 11.5 when everyone went to bed, and it came through at 14.5. And that changed at 2 in the morning when everyone was asleep. So 3 metres extra of water is a lot of water, and it was 2 metres bigger than we had ever seen. So that's why a lot of people were in danger, a lot of people were in risk of drowning through that event. This event that we just had was 9.5 metres. So 9.5 metres versus 14.5 metres is a lot of difference. And so it was why the event certainly didn't cause the carnage that it could have. But Deputy Speaker, I want to go and I want to now talk really about the 2022 event, what this event did and what it triggered, and where we're still at with this in relation to disasters. So, Deputy Speaker, what what happened after the 2022 event was we had two choices to make. So we had thousands of homes, and I mean, get your head around this, thousands of homes that were flooded, not 100, not a few hundred, but thousands of homes. Many thousands of them, the water came up to the gutter and people had to scramble out of their homes. Remember, water had never been to these levels before, so we've had floods. I mean, as a member for Flynn would know, when you live with these things, you know what to do, you know what to expect, you have plans. So everyone had their flood plan. Everyone was built for a flood around 12 to 12.5 metres. Houses had been lifted, people's flood plans with their businesses. They had mezzanine levels in a business, or they took cars or trucks or whatever to levels above the 12 to 12.5 metres. So what happened, of course, is everyone did that in 2022, and everyone did that in this event too, but what happened was the water went 2 metres higher, which meant people were sleeping in their beds, and water started coming at 2 in the morning, and they were in danger. They couldn't get out of their houses. They couldn't go anywhere except scramble to their roofs, which was dangerous. You had old people having to do this. You had children having to do this. You had people swimming underwater, literally, to get out of a house, to get on top of it. You had pets. You had all sorts of stuff. And it's quite a miracle to this day, Deputy Speaker, for me and my community, that only very sadly 5 people drowned, but one of them died before that night. But the fact that only 4 people died was very sad, but still a miracle. So post that event, the community had a big decision to make. It was like, okay, we now have to look at 14.5 metres that this can happen. The town's built for, 12.5. There's a levy that's only built for 10.5. That protects it. Well, it sort of does some protection for the CBD. There's a lot of industrial estates here, Deputy Speaker, and with all due respect, in my mind, Lismore is a bit too big to fail, and it's a bit too big to move. So a decision had to be made. What are we going to do? So there's 2 choices. It's not rocket science. You either move everyone or you mitigate. So what do I mean by mitigate? You do something that means the next flood will be lower than it otherwise would be by work that you've done. Now, a very, very poor decision was made 3 years ago, Deputy Speaker, in the sense the decision was made by the NRRC, a state corporation at the time, was to move everyone. Now, what did that mean? Well, one is they identified 2,000 homes that they thought were in danger, that thought they needed moving. Now, Deputy Speaker, 3 years on, if we're lucky, maybe half of those homes will get moved. So what does that mean? If this tropical cyclone was going to be another event like what we had, people aren't any safer. The ridiculousness of it as well, Deputy Speaker, and this might even make you a bit cranky because it does me, over nearly $1 billion has been spent to identify these houses, and they're going to buy back about half, co-funded by the state government and the federal government. Now, you may well say, what does that achieve if you only move in half of the houses? And I would say, very good question, and not as much as that money should be doing. Another joke about this too, Deputy Speaker, if you sell your house, and the way this was designed and run, work it out, if you sell your house as a buyback, right, they're buying the houses back for around $600,000, guess what? That doesn't stop you from buying a house that someone who can't wait for the buyback is selling on the private market for, say, $300,000. So you can buy a house back for $300,000, have $300,000 left over to renovate it because you want to stay there because your kids go to the school up the road or you work down the road. I don't blame people for doing that, but it's obviously a huge flaw in the scheme. I know a number of people who've done that. So sold on the floodplain, bought back on the floodplain, and have a bit of money left over to renovate the house for them. What has that achieved? Nothing. Right, for people's safety. So 3 years on, what we have is a situation where the CBD isn't more protected. A lot of people have had to go back into their businesses in the CBD, in the industrial estates. They've spent a lot of their own money to do this. They do it because, one, in some cases, they have nothing else they can do. This is their business, this is their livelihood, and they've had to reinvest. But nothing has happened yet that has made their business safer in the CBD, their business safer in any of the industrial estates, and a lot of the people who of those 2,000 homes aren't going to get an offer for a buyback either. So we have a real dog's breakfast in this situation, and what this event did was trigger the dog's breakfast that it is, because not much has really happened to keep a lot of people safer. My community is traumatised by this, Deputy Speaker. I think we have collective PTSD because of this was the biggest disaster in Australia's history. Just to repeat that, right? The biggest disaster in Australia's history is what this region went through. So all that got triggered. Kids get triggered when it rains heavily, and a lot of business owners went through a lot of, personal friends of mine, almost in cathartic positions on their bed on Saturday, terrified of what this event might have been. So, anyway, but there is a solution, Deputy Speaker. There is a solution to this, and I encourage state people in charge of the state entities here, the state government who would have to request this. We commissioned one in government federally through the CSIRO a flood mitigation, a hydrology report. What are the options here? And basically it will work, I think the options, without going into where and how this would happen. You can hold water back, and if you hold water back, for a couple of days, you can let the water get away, then let the water go, so the flood is lower than it otherwise would be. I think 1 metre to 2 metres off a flood makes our community safe and have a future, and people will invest in confidence. I'm told that taking 1 metre to 2 metres off a flood will cost about $2 billion. Now, before you go, oh my God, $2 billion, let me remind you and this chamber that 2022 event was a $15 billion event, because we spend, in federal government and state governments, we spend all the money on disaster recovery, not on prevention. But 1.5 metre-ish, $2 billion means that Lismore, the wider Northern Rivers region, of the whole catchment of the Richmond and Wilson catchment, so you're talking about places like Kyogle and Casino and obviously in Ballina, all the villages would be part of this, making this region safer. That's what we have to start talking about, Deputy Speaker, because at the moment we have a dog's breakfast of a situation of spending $1 billion for a marginal return. So why some of these people have moved on, and good luck to them. But mitigation is the only long-term solution to our region. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
I thank the member and I call the clock.
Committee and delegation business. Next order of the day. Resumption of debate on the report of the Select Committee on Nuclear Energy.
The question is that the document be noted, and I call the member for Spence.
Thank you, Acting Speaker. It gives me great pleasure to stand to speak on the interim report for the inquiry into nuclear power generation in Australia. I want to start out by acknowledging our chair, the fantastic member for Hunter, did an exceptional job on this, and all credit to him. Also wanted to acknowledge the member for Fairfax as our deputy chair, along with a few of my other colleagues. Just bear with me 1 second. I had this written out. Milking the clock, Speaker. I want to acknowledge the member for Gippsland, the member for Swan, member for Fraser, member for Moreton, Kooyong, member for Cook as well. The contributions by everybody on the committee was exceptional. It's a subject matter that's provoked a lot of different feelings across the spectrum within the chamber. So I think the level of respect that was afforded every single member on that committee should be commended, and that doesn't happen without good leadership that came from both the chair, the member for Hunter, and the deputy chair, the member for Fairfax. There's a couple other people I do need to thank: the Secretariat, Kate Portis, and her fantastic team, including Kimberly, Ash, Kathy and Antonia. Without those people from the Secretariat team, we can't do the work that we do. They make sure that we get to the locations we need to, make sure that we have people turn up to do the inquiry itself and ask the questions of the witnesses. So thank you to all of you. We also were aptly supported by companies from Collide and Tarong Power Stations, who gave us very in-depth tours of both of their facilities. Thank you very much for your hospitality. Thank you very much for the explanation. For me personally, I'd never had the opportunity to tour through a coal-fired power station, so it was a big eye-opener for me, and gave me a much better insight into the topic of power generation that we were looking at. To my very good friend over here, the member for Flynn, we were able to go up to Mount Murchison, I think is that right? I've got the pronunciation right. And spent the afternoon with the wonderful Hazel Jensen, and his office helped put on a very country-orientated afternoon tea, which was very much appreciated. It took me back to my childhood, growing up on the farm, and you know, the hospitality that was afforded us was the best we had on our entire trip around the country doing this inquiry. So to the member for Flynn, thank you very much for your warm hospitality up in your neck of the woods. This inquiry is probably the most important work, or some of the most important work that I've been afforded the opportunity to do since my short time in this place. And I guess when you're jumping headfirst into a subject matter that's as big as nuclear power generation, there's a lot to take in. And at the end of the day, there's a couple of pinch points, I guess, that really started to show through consistent themes that raised considerable questions.
Colleagues,
for
a
myself.
division has been called for in the House. The proceedings are suspended to enable honourable members to attend the division. And the proceedings will resume when the Chair of the Federation Chamber is resumed at the conclusion of the division or subsequent divisions. I call the member for Spence.
Ultimately, what this inquiry has found is this is nothing more than nuclear nonsense. Pursuing a nuclear power future is going to be a costlier and more timelier process than we can afford. This is about building an alternative power generation industry that is estimated to cost around $600 billion. This is not an investment being made by private industry. This is an investment that's been asked that the Australian taxpayer foot to deliver on this nuclear nonsense. So it is a very big worry. So what I'll step through, I want to step through a few different parts of what the inquiry uncovered along the way, and I'm going to start off with social licence. I think this is probably one of the most important places for us to start. And the reason why I say that is because this has the possibility of blowing out the delivery of any future nuclear power generation in this country by significantly large timeframes. Claire Savage from the Australian Energy Regulator said that with social licence, where it currently stands, she would estimate 8 to 10 years or thereabouts to deliver the legislative requirements to enable the pursuit of nuclear power generation in this country. Now, that's been refuted from the other side, but the problem you have with that is that when you've got organisations like Liberals Against Nuclear, you know you have a problem with social licence, the very linchpin that is probably either going to see your policy sink or swim. And that's not something that you can dismiss. It's not something that you can dismiss from my personal experience, having seen what happened around nuclear waste storage facilities in South Australia, where social licence wasn't obtained and it sunk the pursuit of a nuclear waste storage facility out in the mid-north. But it gets ever much harder when you have your own party faithful, your rank and file, starting up a group called Liberals Against Nuclear, because that's not, as some people would put it, just the crazy left. That's now your side of the equation, adding their voice to what is a real concern for people in this country. The inquiry also talked about cost, and there's a couple of components to cost: the cost up front, but also the potential cost blowouts. And when we look at examples across the world, there are instances where the cost blowout is astronomical, absolutely astronomical. You have the Hinkley Point C project, which has blown out now to around $92 billion for a single nuclear reactor, which is just, it's mind-blowing, Speaker. It really is mind-blowing. That is just but one example of a cost blowout. The Vogel plant nuclear power station, 7 years late, $17 billion over budget. The list goes on and on and on. And the other problem with that is the fact that there is this pursuit of small modular reactors in South Australia. Actually, that's the only type of reactor that's been slated for South Australia. And the problem with small modular reactors, as my good friend from Western Australia will attest, is they don't exist commercially off the shelf anywhere in the Western world, which makes that really, really difficult to comprehend how we are going to establish a nuclear power generation industry in South Australia if we're pursuing a technology that doesn't exist. This is the type of fantasy land place that we are currently sitting in. So it's just not comprehensible. I just can't get my head around where we currently are at. On top of this, not only are we pursuing technology that's not currently commercially available around the world, but there's this fake promise that it's going to deliver hundreds, if not thousands of jobs. But this does not mean that it's a straightforward transition for coal workers coming out of their existing coal-fired power stations straight into what has not yet been built, a nuclear power station. This will require retraining, and it does run with the problem that there is a huge time delay between an announcement to pursue nuclear energy power generation in this country and delivery of a nuclear reactor in this country. The first nuclear reactor will take somewhere around 15 to 20 years to deliver. We're talking the 2040s. Now, most of our coal-fired power stations are due to close in the early 2030s. That is a huge time lag in between closure and a new station coming online. This inquiry has found that it is just not feasible to pursue nuclear power generation in Australia. Thank you.
The question is that the document be noted. I call the member for Flynn.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And I would like to make a contribution in respect to the interim report into nuclear power generation in Australia, and particularly from the point of view of my electorate of Flynn in central Queensland, where there has been a proposal to possibly build a nuclear facility at the old at the Callide Power Station near Biloela. And the whole energy debate is obviously front and centre. It is very topical. There are many different points of view. It is a rather polarising debate with those that support traditional power generation, coal and gas, versus the renewable energy industry, wind turbines, solar panels, batteries, pumped hydro and so forth, other alternative energy sources such as production of green hydrogen, etc. One of the most tragedies, or one of the biggest tragedies to me in this whole energy debate, is that nearly 25 years ago there was a decision made in Parliament House here to put a moratorium on nuclear energy in Australia. And what that has led to is a whole generation of people in our education system who've not pursued the science and everything that is involved in respect to nuclear anything. And that has put Australia in a very difficult position right now. We know that we have signed up to the AUKUS program to have nuclear submarines here. We will have to train people to manage, to build, to operate, and we'll have to come up with the technologies to deal with the waste and the maintenance and everything in regard to having nuclear submarines. Having made that decision, and as Australians, and our government has committed some $4 billion to Rolls-Royce to develop those nuclear reactors that will go in those submarine boats, doesn't it make practical common sense to include industrial and domestic nuclear power? Well, to me it does. And these arguments that are very exaggerated in respect to having nuclear energy are very topical and, as I said, very polarising. There are over 400 nuclear reactors around the world providing clean, efficient and reliable power to many industrialised countries. And many of those industrialised countries are revamping their nuclear systems and reinvesting in nuclear systems. And for Australia to shut itself out from that possibility is, to me, a tragedy for future generations of Australia. We should be having sensible and logical debates about our energy future. Here in Australia, we do have a nuclear reactor at Lucas Heights. It's been there since 1960 or thereabouts, and it is recognised as a gold standard medical nuclear facility. There are scientists and the medical profession in general who come to Sydney, to Lucas Heights to pursue their profession, to make studies in respect to medical nuclear technology. All of that waste that has been produced there at Lucas Heights is stored on site and has been since it was started. Come 2030, there is an argument that Lucas Heights will run low of storage, and that is why the previous government developed a proposal to build a nuclear waste site at Kimber in South Australia, but that has now been vetoed. But the point is that we've already got this technology. We're already dealing with it. We've already signed up to the AUKUS agreements with the possibility of having nuclear-powered submarines. Why can't we have this logical debate in respect to nuclear energy and let the experts make these decisions and feed into these conversations instead of toing and froing with politicians such as myself who really know nothing about it, we're only scratching the surface. The former speaker talked about social licence. Up in central Queensland, where I come from, as I said, there's a proposal to build a facility there by the coalition government, should we become the government. I have held many, many forums, a dozen in fact, on this very subject. And of all of the people who responded to us, some 3,000 people, 68% of them were in favour of pursuing nuclear technology. It's pretty much a must-have where I come from. The Flynn electorate in central Queensland is one of the big economic engine rooms in Australia. We have the coal industry, the alumina industry, the coal loading terminal at Gladstone. It's the world's 4th largest coal loading terminal. The gas industry, heavy industry of all sorts, the railways and all of that sort of thing. It needs a constant, reliable source of energy. And people know up there, you cannot run the alumina smelter and the 2 refineries there on wind turbines and solar panels. It just simply won't work. You cannot run the electric train system to the central Queensland coal mines that deliver 70 million tonnes of coal to the port of Gladstone. You can't do that on wind turbines and solar panels. It just is illogical to even suggest that you can. You need a system of batteries and pumped hydro and an enormous investment to make it even feasible to work. So this is another argument that has come up in this report, and that's about cost. What does it all cost? And I know we're only coming up with ballpark figures, and the coalition has engaged Frontier Economics to do their estimations on it, and they've come up with a figure of approximately $330 billion. And that's expensive. I recognise that. But so is renewable energy. And again, Frontier Economics came up with a figure of over $600 billion for renewable. Well, I would argue that it's going to be a lot more than that. And I'll tell you why that is, because in my electorate, again, we are having these enormous wind turbines being built, and I'm dealing with over 80 proposals in my electorate alone. We know from facts that are there now, Lotus Creek, for an example, $1.3 billion project, 46 turbines. If you do the math there, that's $28 million a turbine. I've done a lot of work with Stephen now Kowalski, mapping all of these turbines right around Australia, and there are some 21,000 of them that we have identified and we have mapped. So if you do some ballpark figures on that and use a nominal figure of $20 million per turbine and multiply that by 20,000 turbines, you're talking $400 billion. And that's just for the wind turbines. When you start adding in the transmission lines, the pumped hydro and all of the network charges and everything that's got to happen to make it work, Princeton University in America and Melbourne University's estimation of $1.5 trillion by 2030, in my humble opinion, is more like the ballpark. But if we ask that question of the government, how much will renewable energy cost us? They won't tell you. They don't have a figure. And I find that quite appalling, to saddle up Australians to these enormous projects, particularly when they've got issues like the capacity investment scheme, where Australians will be asked to underwrite the power generation of these projects, even if they don't produce any power. And that's quite a ridiculous notion. So nuclear energy, as I said, is widely accepted where I come from, and I understand there is angst amongst communities everywhere. Everybody uses these silly little memes of three-eyed fish and so forth. What nonsense! What absolute nonsense! As I said, there are over 400 nuclear facilities around the world, providing the cleanest and most reliable power to the biggest industrial nations on the planet. And we as Australians should be having sensible debates about what our future holds and how we are going to provide for our consumers reliable and affordable and energy that has longevity attached to it.
I thank the member. The question is that the document be noted, and I call the member for Swan.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. It is my pleasure to have the opportunity to speak on this committee inquiry report. As a member of the committee, I saw this as a really important inquiry. It's interesting because an observation I would say is that there is some talent in the coalition, and there are some ideas, and sometimes there are big ideas. But big ideas don't necessarily mean good ideas. And this is an example of not just a not good idea, a terrible idea. And so it is great to have the opportunity to reflect on the interim findings and share some insights with the Chamber today. As the only engineer in the Labor Party caucus, I was naturally excited to participate in this work. The expertise has served me well through my time in this place, and especially in this inquiry. Not just because I've worked on the mines and steel cap boots on the mines, but also because I've had the opportunity to work in decarbonisation for over 12 years, looking at energy transition, looking at electricity grids, looking at what the future energy needs has been bread and butter of what I have done for over 12 years. So that insight has brought some skills and expertise to this inquiry. And as an engineer, I believe in evidence-based decision-making, and this report provides that evidence. Over the course of this inquiry, the committee held 19 public hearings right across the country. We heard from a wide range of voices, from global nuclear experts to Australian scientists, engineers, energy and climate change specialists. We listened closely to our federal agencies responsible for Australia's existing nuclear activities. I think it's also important to say that, yes, we do have a current nuclear industry, and the nuclear industry plays a really important role in our health sector, and the medical isotopes that are produced by Lucas Heights are life-saving across the country. And so I'm going to say that I think that the Australian public is smart enough to understand that. But when we're talking about nuclear power generation, this is a very different proposition. We also heard directly from First Nation communities, environmental organisations and everyday Australians, all raising serious concerns about the trust, transparency and social licence for nuclear power energy. The interim report makes one thing abundantly clear. Peter Dutton, the opposition leader's nuclear fantasy is indeed a nuclear nightmare. It doesn't stack up, not on time, not on cost, not even on the proportion of that it will contribute to the electricity grid, and it's not appropriate for Australian. This inquiry asks two questions. Can nuclear be rolled out fast enough, and can it compete on cost? And so the answer, based on the evidence from the real experts, is clear. It's a resounding no. Can it be compatible with the future electricity grid? We should have an idea on what this can do, and like when we asked all of the can it be rolled out fast enough, can it compete on cost, And the truth is, it cannot. And so I think that we should throw it in the trash can. Even if we lifted the ban and started right now, we wouldn't see a single nuclear power station until the 2040s. That's nearly 2 decades away. Too late to hit our climate targets, too late to support coal workers and communities through transition. And it's not just about timing, it's also about cost. Nuclear is the most expensive form of electricity. It is expensive to run. So let's be truthful about this policy. What this policy is really about kicking the can down the road on climate change action. And let's be honest, because Australia has no commercial nuclear experience, and we're told to expect a 100% premium on build costs. That's right, double the price. And who's going to pay for that? Is this a commercial idea? No. What the proposal is for taxpayers to pay for this. Me, my electorate, all of Australia. And if we're talking about dollar figures, we're talking about $600 billion. That's a lot of coin. And if we looked at the budget that we delivered last night, that was $785 billion. So when you look at this one idea, this one expensive idea, it is honestly off the charts. And so also let's get real about workers. The future is clean, fast and affordable. And it's funny, there's a really great book that's written by a guy called Charles Duhigg, and it's called Smarter, Faster, Better. And I can't help but think that this idea is dumber, slower, crapper. Renewables are powering homes already. The biggest form of electricity that we've seen grow in Australia has been rooftop solar. People are enjoying seeing the democratisation of their electricity. And what we're seeing is that renewables is delivering jobs, it's delivering investment, and it's honestly cheaper because guess what? We don't pay when the sun's shining and when the wind is blowing. But what I will say is that we do need to make sure that we have firming opportunities for our electricity grid as well. And so gas has a role to play. In the meantime, we also have batteries, and there will be solutions like pumped hydro. We have the technology, we have the know-how, we have the workforce. We don't need another distraction. What we need is action. This report makes it clear. Nuclear is not the answer. Australia can't afford to waste more time or money chasing a nuclear nightmare. Let's focus on what works and what will actually deliver cleaner, cheaper energy for all Australians. I think that I also want to thank the entire committee for all of the work that they did, and the member for Hunter for his leadership as the chair on this inquiry. It was great to have the opportunity to go spend time in Collie, which is in the southwest of WA. This is a country town which has been a coal mining town and a coal-fired power station town. They have done an important job of providing electricity for the state. But what we saw with the state government announced that we would be closing down our coal-fired power stations. And they did that because they knew that that was the right thing to do to ensure that we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions of our grid. What that also did was provide certainty to our workers. And so what the WA state government is in the process of doing is investing in amazing industries to have a look at the way that we create a just transition for those workers. And I think that that's what coal workers want, right? That's what they want. This nuclear fantasy will not deliver jobs by the time this coal-fired power station closes down. It is not practical. It's not going to deliver real solutions. The other thing that I also wanted to talk about is what grids of the future look like. And so what we're seeing is people look at what is the most cost-competitive form of energy for electricity grids. First of all, it's solar panels. Second of all, it's wind. It is cheap, and this is what we're seeing commercial companies invest in. So as we look at the grid changing, this idea of baseload is actually, again, a fallacy. And so when people talk about the switching of coal-fired power stations to nuclear power stations. It's wrong. That's like something that we don't need anymore. It takes too long to ramp up a coal-fired power station, too long to ramp it down, and the truth is nuclear power stations do not have that ability. It is not compatible with the cheapest form of electricity which exists here in Australia. It's interesting because Australia has such an exciting opportunity to be a part of the clean energy revolution across the world, and that will be through renewable energy. We have an opportunity to see our electricity prices reduce, and we will do that through renewables. Nuclear power is not going to be the solution for Australia or Western Australia. We need to make sure that we invest in what's smart. We need to do things that are evidence-based. All of the time that I've worked as an engineer in decarbonisation, this has never been an idea that the big companies have talked about. And I worked on St George's Terrace for over a decade for the big ASX 200 companies. Like I said, I see this as the opposite of the book, Smarter, Faster, Better, Dumber, Slower, Crapper, Bad Idea, Nuclear, Nightmare. Let's not vote this in.
The question is that the document be noted. I call the member for Grey.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'm pleased that the chair of this committee has joined us in the chamber. And I must say, though, and he won't like what I'm going to say, but I'm disappointed with the negativity with the committee comments. And that's the majority committee, of course, which was made up entirely of government members, the majority, in the interim report. It's curious and depressing how government members form a different view to the rest of the G20 nations. And I'm just listening to the member for Swan speak about community licence, if it were, and it would come as a disappointment to her just how much the community is accepting the view, particularly young Australians, that we need to find a different way to net zero, because the pathway we're on is actually costing us business, it is costing us wealth, it is costing us investment all around Australia. The government's net zero by 2025, with impossibly shorter term targets, they target that destination with a renewable-only pathway. And I, quite frankly, only zealots believe that this is close to possible with an alternative to coal baseload generation. The world is choosing nuclear in the mix. Now, let me go to the South Australian experience. I'm a South Australian, and we're very lucky in this parliament, and I've said on many occasions we've had South Australia on this electricity pathway for some time. They're the canary in the coal mine. South Australia has a 75% renewable network, and we should go, way, that's a really good outcome. It is better than the next mainland state in Australia by a magnitude of double. South Australia has double the renewable electricity in its grid to the next state. But it's not the only place that we excel, Madam Deputy Speaker. We have a 50% higher retail price than the next state. 50% higher electricity is in South Australia than it is in New South Wales. Victoria is very similar rate. Like that old saying, South Australia is the driest state and the driest continent. In this particular case, South Australia has the highest electricity price in a country that has some of the highest electricity prices in the world. No wonder our businesses, our industries are struggling. Now, just as a matter of proof on this, I used my own bill, very happy to do so. I went back recently and pulled out some accounts from just after the election of the Albanese government from June 2022, July 2022, I think. It was my electricity was 28 cents a kilowatt hour. 28 cents a kilowatt hour. My latest bill is 42. Now, I don't know what the member for Hunter's like at his math, but I can tell you that's a 50% increase. 50% higher now than it was 3 years ago. And it's bound to get worse because Victoria is shutting down its, well, it may not be actually, they're looking for an extension on Loy Yang at the moment, but they're shutting down its coal-fired power stations, and that's where South Australia is getting its backup from. When the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, we've heard it all before, that's where South Australia gets its power from. There is an investment in batteries around at the moment, but we know this is a very important thing for people to understand. The cost in renewable energy is in the firming. And when you begin the journey of firming, it is cheap. It costs virtually nothing. If you want going from zero and going to a position of 20% renewable, well, you just plug into the power station. You know, the coal-fired power station comes in, the gas comes in, it just backs up. It doesn't cost anything. When you get to 50, it starts to hurt. It was the lowering of cost when energy is abundant that closed down the coal-fired power station in Port Augusta, because a power station that used to be able to sell energy at a profit all of the time became a power station that could only sell energy at a profit some of the time. In fact, less than 70 days a year could that place run at a profit, but it had to operate all the time. And so in the end, it became a liability. They closed it down and the price of our power spiked in South Australia quite dramatically, and it's not come down since, I can tell you. So my bill I was telling you about, I've had a 50% increase in the last 3 years. I was at a fish processor in Port Lincoln quite recently, and they shared their electricity bills with me. And despite the fact they'd covered their roof in solar panels, they'd had more than a 50% increase. And I can tell you they use bucket loads of electricity because they have giant chillers there, freezers to both chill the fish and freeze the fish. I can tell you, I haven't spoken to them, I bet they're very excited about the $150 rebate that came through the budget yesterday. They'd be less excited, of course, even marginally, about the scrapping of the instant tax write-offs. But the problems with renewable is this cost of firming. When the committee was established, this committee, in a speech I criticised its narrow scope. It was then and remains a lynch mob, a platform for anti-nuclear zealots, always intended to find the government's renewable-only policies were the best pathway, despite clear evidence from many people in the inquiry, and I haven't had the opportunity to read every page yet, but I can certainly find evidence in it of disputed opinion. And one of the sections in this report calls for social licence. And of course, the committee went to every site that the coalition has nominated as a possible site for nuclear generation. I think the member for Hunter would have been disappointed with the protest crowd in Port Augusta when he got there. I mean, they weren't exactly manning the barracks, were they, and out there with their placards. There were a couple of people who were opposed, who gave evidence. I can report that they were left over from an earlier nuclear war, and that was about the siting of the National Radioactive Waste Management Facility, when one of the sites suggested was the Flinders Ranges. And so, despite the fact they lived nowhere near Port Augusta, they came down for the hearing that particular way. On that particular issue, and it shows the government's complete fear of anything that looks like nuclear. We had a community in Australia, Kimber, my hometown, that had stuck its hand up to host the National Radioactive Waste Management Facility, was keen to do so, had over 62% of the population in favour of, had been through both houses of Parliament, and then when an Indigenous organisation raised an objection in fact that would have been easily overturned, the government ran for cover. And here we are now, 3 years later, 3 years later, 3 years later, and we still have no answer for where the waste from Lucas Heights is going to go when that facility is full. And our Panzer has warned that it will be full in some sections by 2029. This government's got no plan. They have, and it was one thwarted. I will take the interjection, because when we were in government, we tried to get this beyond judicial review, but those in the Labor Party and those on the crossbenches in the Senate that knew not what they were talking about refused that position. It's worth noting, Member for Moreton, the department contacted this Indigenous group 180 times to inform them of what was going on and could get no response. And then they went to the court and said, we haven't been consulted. How pathetic. How pathetic. And it was your opposition that had not allowed it to pass through the Senate as we intended. So back to Port Augusta. And Port Augusta has been visited by the member for Fairfax. I've met with the representatives of the Port Augusta Council and residents on a number of occasions. Will Shackle brought the Nuclear for Australia Travelling Roadshow to Port Augusta, and with the panel of experts, which included the 2023 Miss America Grace Stanke. She was very warmly received. That panel was very warmly received. And last year I sent out a flyer, and I told the people of Port Augusta, as part of the coalition plans, there would be an industrial precinct that would be able to access electricity direct from the power station, not going through the transmission grid and upping the price by more than 50%, but the most reliable, cheapest and cleanest form of electricity available in Australia. There would be a flocking of industrial investment into any community that hosts these facilities. With all that information, no wonder in Port Augusta we're getting a good result. Now, when I put out this flyer, I didn't get much response, I have to say. It went to every citizen in Port Augusta. And I rang up a mate to make sure that Australia Post had done the right thing, and I said, "Did you get a flyer from me, the Post?" He said, yeah, the nuclear thing. I said, "Yeah. What do you reckon?" I said, "I haven't had any negative feedback." He said, "No, that's because everyone I know reckons it's a bloody good idea and you should get on with it." Well, that sums it up, I think. So, government policies are strangling Australian industry at the moment. We need a change.
The question is that the document be noted, and I call the member for Moreton.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Do you remember learning in primary school how unique our island continent is? I remember being taught that the Great Barrier Reef is the longest reef in the world and that it could be seen from outer space. I'm not sure if that's true, but I remember hearing about that. A big thing in Queensland. And also that we were the smallest continent, filled with animals not found anywhere else. And one fact I particularly remember is that Australia is the driest inhabited continent in the world. Not the driest, but inhabited. Antarctica is actually drier. So growing up in St George out in Western Queensland, this fact wasn't too hard to imagine. We went for long periods without rain. In fact, 70% of Australia is classified as either arid or semi-arid. In the arid zone, there is an average rainfall of 250 millimetres or less. This fact is particularly pertinent now given the Coalition's nuclear fantasy. The Honourable Opposition Leader, Mr Dutton's nuclear plan is fanciful in numerous ways, as detailed by the Chair, Rapacoli, in his speech this morning, the Honourable Member Mr Rapacoli this morning, but there's so many other things. We know it's fanciful because of the cost, the time frame, the risks, the legal barriers and the lack of social licence. That's been covered by many of the other speakers so far. But I'm going to particularly talk about the fact that the LNP's pipe dream, nuclear pipe dream, involves generating nuclear energy on the driest inhabited continent on Earth. And I'm particularly going to talk about Queensland. We know that water plays a crucial role in the generation of nuclear power. Most people know that water plays a crucial role. Put simply by Associate Professor Obbard from the University of New South Wales Nuclear Innovation Centre, and I quote, "The job of water is to somehow pump all the heat out of the reactor and do something useful with it to make electricity." And now I'm sure the member for Fairfax, when he came up with this wonderful plan that he took to his leader, did something as simple as Googling those words, nuclear, power, water. That's what I did. In fact, I did it today. And this is what came up. Nuclear power plants require significant amounts of water for cooling, primarily to condense steam back into water after it has powered turbines, but also to cool the reactor core. While the water is used extensively, it is not consumed but rather recycled and is used in a closed-loop system. So they typically use 13 to 24 billion litres per year, or about 35 to 65 million litres per day. Now, to put that in context, as someone that used to be on the Olympic Games Committee, an Olympic swimming pool is about 2.5 million litres. So the nuclear reactors use 14 to 26 Olympic swimming pools per day. And that's water not used for farming. Because we know that the two proposed sites for nuclear power plants in Queensland, because I went there with the Chair, went there with the chair of the committee. There are the coal-fired power stations at Callide and Tarong. Tarong I'd been visited many years before when I was a mines advisor in the Queensland state government. Callide currently has an allocation of 20,000 megalitres a year from the Callide Dam. It's estimated that a nuclear power plant would require at least double this amount and maybe even more. Now, similar story at Tarong, which will require an additional 55% more water than the current coal-fired power station uses. The dams that both power stations draw their water from also supply drinking water to little towns like Gladstone, Kingaroy, Billawheeler. Now, these dams have another vital use as well. They supply water for irrigation, for agriculture and replenishment of aquifers in these areas. Now, I know that there is one member from the National Party present in the chamber. I do note that the member for Fairfax sits here in the Liberal Party room. He doesn't sit in the National Party room, but I know my little bit of political history, and I know that when I grew up, there was a party. I was represented in my town by a party called the Country Party. Growing up in the bush, the Country Party looked after farmers, and they were also made up of farmers. They were never, ever the Liberal lapdogs. The Country Party in Queensland, they stood up for themselves and they stood up for farmers in particular. The old Country Party would never abandon the bush. They would never screw over farmers in pursuit of a nuclear fantasy around Callide and around Tarong to appease their inner city Liberals. The MP for Fairfax has no place for farmers. What did he talk about? Regional economic hubs. Regional economic hubs. You know, I listened to what he had to say. No place for farmers. They're giving up on the bush. The Coalition's plan rests on the assumption that there is water available in the first place. The Callide Dam, currently at 16.5% capacity. It's fed by our Wonga Dam, which is currently under 50% capacity. This is no surprise when you consider that since 1964, which isn't that long ago, the Banana Shire LGA, which contains Callide, has had 11 periods of declared drought, as declared by the Queensland Government. 1964 is when the Queensland Government started recording drought declaration status. And the records show that in the same time frame, the area encompassing Tarong has had 12 periods of declared drought. So why would you find the areas that have been drought declared every other year, basically, and say, let's put a water-intensive nuclear power station there? Unbelievable. Obviously designed by a Liberal, not by a National who understands farmers and the bush. So I'd certainly like to know what the LNP's backup plans for Callide and Tarong are when the dams dry up and more droughts are declared, as they invariably will be. Bad luck, townsfolk that want water to drink. Bad luck, townsfolk that want to have a shower or a bath. Bad luck, local farmers, if you've got a business hooked into these water supplies. However, like so much of the Honourable Opposition Leader Mr Dutton's nuclear plan, their backup is unspecified, uncertain and murky. No responsible government would gamble Australian taxpayer money, and vast sums of it, on such an unreliable prospect. And my understanding, I didn't go to all of the other sites, but several of them have water constraints as well, the Deputy Chair can attest to. The Chair can attest to. Probably the Deputy Chair as well, if he'd been listening. And although I'm sure the LNP would rather we didn't, we also need to talk about the risk of a nuclear accident, when vast quantities of water could be required to avoid a reactor meltdown. As the Director of the Queensland Conservation Council states, there is simply not enough water available to run nuclear facilities in the proposed inland locations, and no plan for where to store irradiated water required for heat reduction in the case of an emergency. And look, I had heard great evidence from the people of Billawheeler and the people that came to the Nanango hearings. And I understand from keeping in the committee that there were great awareness and people were prepared to engage with the idea all throughout Australia. But the House Select Committee on Nuclear Energy, when they published the interim report of the inquiry, we'd heard testimony over 19 days of public hearings across the country, including in each of the regions where the Coalition plans to build nuclear power plants. The inquiry also considered over 850 written submissions, and they found that the impact of nuclear power generation on Australia's water supplies has been inadequately considered by the Coalition in its proposal. Meanwhile, the Albanese Labor government is getting on with harnessing the natural resources we are blessed with to generate renewable energy. During droughts, guess what? The sun shines more. During drought, the wind can still blow. That's the beauty of it. We've approved 77 renewable energy projects, enough to power 10 million Australian homes that already. And that's 15 gigawatts, more than the Dutton plan delivers in 20 or 30 years for $600 billion. The opposition leaders, Commonwealth nuclear public servants, haven't been hired yet. I don't think anybody needs to start working on their CVs right at the moment. This is not a science-driven solution, it is a political wedge. Private capital won't touch it with a barge pole. The private capital knows that it would be better off putting it on race 7 at Eagle Farm rather than backing this fantasy. So while the coalition exists in fantasy land, Labor is implementing a strong and responsible plan for Australia's current and future energy needs right now, working with the coal-fired power stations, working with the gas-fired power stations, working with renewable energy projects to make sure that we've got a manufacturing sector right now, not some fantasy that will come along in 40 years, working with these people right now to ensure that we have a manufacturing sector and also that we look after the farmers in the bush and make sure their water supplies are secured. Because I might be from the bush representing the city now, but I understand how to look after farmers. The Nationals seem to have forgotten that.
Thank you. The question is that the document be noted. I call the member for O'Connor.
Thank you, Acting Deputy Speaker, and I acknowledge as I follow on from the member for Moreton, possibly his last contribution in this place, as he's just about quoted out, another couple of days, wasn't probably going to be one of your best contributions, unfortunately, and I don't think it'll age well. But to the chair of the committee, the member for Hunter, I thank him for bringing the committee to Collie in my electorate, and it was good to give the people of Collie and certainly some experts that appear before the committee the opportunity to have some input into the findings of the committee, which having looked at the evidence and looked at what received, I find it difficult to see how the committee arrived at its conclusion, but that's of course the privilege of the chair to direct the Secretariat to produce the report at the end of the day. And my good friend, the member for Cook, who has only been in this place a little bit over 12 months, said during his contribution this morning that he came in here naively thinking that these committees were about actually going out, gathering evidence, considering that evidence in an unbalanced and an unbiased and balanced way, and then come out with a conclusion which is in the best interest, which is supported by the evidence and in the best interest of the nation. But he was sadly disillusioned by the way that things panned out. And when I think back to my own experience, middle of last year, we had I'm the deputy chair of the Agricultural Standing Committee, and once again we had a report that was delivered which certainly wasn't backed up by the evidence that the committee heard over the period of that committee's work. But to get back to the issue at hand, which is nuclear, the potential for nuclear energy in this country and how it might solve some of the issues that we're confronting, which includes some of the highest energy costs in the world, up to 3 times higher than equivalent jurisdictions. And the Labor Party has never revealed the true cost of its renewables only plan through to 2050, and not even the market operator could advise the House Select Committee on the nuclear inquiry the total system cost of the renewables only plan. But we do see the cost to businesses and households soaring, up to $1,300 increase in the last 3 years alone. And as I say, the highest energy costs of any sort of similar jurisdiction in the world. No evidence was presented to the inquiry to challenge the Frontier Economics report, which put a price tag of $642 billion on the Labor Party's plan, and that's before factoring in the billions more for transition lines, land acquisition and storage. And of course, the $642 billion, for those people from Western Australia who may watch this what's this little video, didn't include Western Australia. That's the eastern market grid, and West Australia, the Southwest Integrated System, is separate from that. So in November last year, it was quite revealing on the ABC Country Hour, where Jay Thomas, who is the Coordinator of Energy for a WA government initiative called Powering WA, and he estimated the level of investment required for the WA system would be, and this is a direct quote, in the order of $200 billion over the next 20 to 25 years. That's just for the WA system, so that's on top of the eastern market over here. So in comparison, the total system cost of the Coalition's plan to transform the entire national electricity market through to 2050, including nuclear energy, is $331 billion. This includes transmission lines, renewables, gas and nuclear. The nuclear part of the equation is around $120 billion, with nuclear making up 38% of a balanced energy mix. Labor's 100% renewable only plan, by comparison, is 44% more expensive and does not provide any firming baseload power for when the sun does not shine and the wind doesn't blow. Now, the nuclear hearing visited my electorate of Collie, the site for a proposed small modular reactor, and I do thank all those who took time to put in a submission, make a submission, or give evidence to the committee. And look, Collie has long been the energy capital of Western Australia, with several coal-fired power plants delivering reliable electricity to large parts of Western Australia through the comprehensive transmission network which radiates out of Collie. And Collie also produces the electricity for the nearby Worsley Alumina Refinery, which supports over 2,000 jobs. So the good people of Collie and surrounds have a high degree of energy literacy. If they haven't worked in the coal mines or in the power plants, they've been involved in other industries dependent on the reliable energy produced in Collie, and are most accustomed to wages commensurate with their skills. They're all concerned about their employment, particularly given that the WA state government plans to close down the coal mines and the Muja power plant in 2029. Now, Deputy Speaker, I just want to, I know the Labor Party think they're on a political winner here, but we did see in the Queensland election they gave up on trying to run the scare campaign up there after a few weeks. And in the recent WA election, it was very revealing that the seat of Collie Preston, which is, Collie is a Labor town. It's a union town. It's a Labor town. And Jodie Harnes, who's led the scare campaign on behalf of Labor in WA, the member for Perth popped up with the odd cameo performance, but it's mainly been the member for Collie Preston, who's run the scare campaign. So on election night, which wasn't great for the WA Liberal Party, I'll be the first to admit that, but I did note that the seat of Collie Preston had a 19% two-party preferred swing against it, the Labor Party, the sitting member. The primary vote for the sitting member, who, as I say, had been leading the scare campaign, the swing against her on the primary vote was 20%. So I'm just not that sure that this is the political winner, particularly in the town of Collie, that people think it is. Sorry, you want to quote the numbers to me?
I was looking at the results. Yeah, you only got 22.9%.
What's the two-party preferred swing? It's 20%. We have a preferential voting system, in case you hadn't noticed. You might notice come election day. But, Deputy Speaker, nuclear energy is not just confined in my electorate to Collie and the interest in nuclear energy. In fact, in the town of Kalgoorlie, which is at the end of a 600-kilometre transmission line, which has regularly had power blackouts, and in February 2024, the power was out for up to a week for some residents there. They are crying out for a nuclear power plant in Kalgoorlie. It was transmission issues, yeah. Yeah, but if you have a power plant in Kalgoorlie, then you don't have the transmission issues. You can send it back down the so you can send it back down the line, Dan. So let me. Am I able to speak here, or okay? So when the Leader of the Opposition came to Diggers and Dealers in Kalgoorlie in August last year, to meet with mining industry people, as we drove into town, there's a banner on one of the main intersections it's on Hannon Street, and the banner said, Kalgoorlie Boulder welcomes Peter Dutton and welcomes nuclear energy. So, there are towns out there, there are people across my electorate who welcome nuclear energy because they can see the benefits of it. But not only that, in the seat of O'Connor, we've got 3 uranium deposits, which Australia does mine uranium. We export it to the rest of the world. But there are 3 deposits in O'Connor that are waiting to be exploited. One of them, Deep Yellow's Mulga Rock, is permitted and ready to go. They're in the process of preparing that mine for operation. So we will see uranium being mined in O'Connor. It'll be trucked through Kalgoorlie and then out through to South Australia, where it'll be exported out of Adelaide, the Port of Adelaide, which is already accredited, and we export a significant amount of uranium out of Adelaide. But that's right. So we mine uranium, we export it. But not only that, we have an extraordinary storage site in the electorate of O'Connor at Sandy Ridge, which is about halfway between Coolgardie and Southern Cross. It's one of the most geologically stable parts of the planet, of the surface. It is fully permitted. It is permitted to accept low-level nuclear waste, which was the planned site in South Australia at Kimber, which fell over. But the site at Sandy Ridge is permitted to take low-level nuclear waste and is ready to go. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. The question is that the document be noted. I call the member for Bennelong.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'd just like to pay tribute to the work of the member for Hunter in chairing this nuclear energy inquiry, yet another inquiry into the viability of nuclear energy in Australia. But I think the member for Hunter did an extraordinary job on a very tight schedule. We do chat a lot, and it was a pretty hectic schedule going all around the country and listening to plenty of submissions, hearing from a lot of experts, and delivering what I believe to be a really robust interim report, which is absolutely crystal clear, Deputy Speaker. Its findings say this: nuclear energy is too slow, it's too expensive, and it's too risky. If they weren't in before, they're in again. The facts are here. The expert advice is consistent, and Australians deserve honesty, not a half-baked nuclear fantasy conjured up to distract from a decade of climate inaction by the Liberals and Nationals. Deputy Speaker, their policy proposal for nuclear is not a serious policy proposal, and because of that, the Liberals and Nationals are not serious political parties. Their nuclear policy is a dangerous delay tactic. It's a Trojan horse for extending the life of coal-fired power stations. And it's a plan that would raise power bills, not lower them. Deputy Speaker, the chair of the committee, the member for Hunter, summed it up best. He said it could be well into the 2040s before we might see nuclear energy generated in Australia. Well into the 2040s. That's 15 years from now at a minimum. And that's if everything goes right, which we know with nuclear, it rarely does. Just ask the UK, where Hinkley Point C is now nearly a decade overdue and £20 billion over budget. Or in the US, where Georgia's Vogtle nuclear plant has doubled in cost and is 7 years late. This is a problem, a real problem that those opposite do not acknowledge. Australia does not have the time to wait for nuclear power, because under the former coalition government, let's not forget, 24 coal-fired power plants announced their closures. The operators of them announced their closures. 90% of our coal-fired power is forecast to retire by 2035. That's just 10 years away. To make matters worse, during their 10 years in government, they did next to nothing about this. They didn't introduce a nuclear plan when they were actually in government. And then they left us with 4 gigawatts less power in the system while only introducing 1 gigawatt of new power. That's a deficit of 3 gigawatts. With power exiting the system, with coal-fired power shutting in the next decade, we need new power in the system now, not in 20 years' time, waiting for their expensive and risky nuclear reactors. In the interim, prices will go up, and what's going to happen with power in between? The light's going to go out. What's going to happen to manufacturing? What's going to happen to industry? Their plan is not just reckless, it's a fantasy. Independent experts at the CSIRO and the Australian Energy Market Operator have made these facts plain and simple for us to read. Their latest GenCost report confirms that reliable renewables, firmed solar and wind, are the cheapest form of energy. They price it at $83 and to $120 per megawatt hour by 2030. In contrast, the same report shows nuclear power, even the so-called small modular reactors, would cost up to $382 per megawatt hour to produce electricity. That's up to 8 times more than renewables. And even if nuclear weren't prohibitively expensive, it still wouldn't work, because nuclear power simply isn't compatible with renewables. It's inflexible, it needs to run constantly, it can't ramp up or down quickly, and it can't respond to fluctuations in solar or wind output. That makes it a poor fit for a modern grid that needs clean, variable sources of energy in it. By contrast, firm renewables backed by batteries, pumped hydro, and flexible gas can respond in real time. They're adaptable, they're scalable, and they're already being built. I mean, we heard the Minister for the Environment say the other day, in our term of government, we've added 15 gigawatts of renewable energy generation into our grid, which is more than the Liberals plan for their 7 nuclear reactors. We're doing it. It's happening right now. So trying to force nuclear into a renewables-backed grid is like trying to jam a square peg in a round hole. It's inefficient, it drives up system costs, and it makes it harder to deliver the flexible energy that Australians need. Nuclear doesn't complement renewables, it competes with them, and it will destroy them. Every dollar spent on nuclear is a dollar taken away from proven technologies that are cheaper, faster, dispatchable, and already working. And that doesn't even factor the enormous first-of-a-kind costs Australia would have to pay because we do not have a nuclear power industry here. We'd be spending $16 billion per reactor, money that would come straight from cuts, higher bills, increased taxes, or a combination of all of those things. We've been here before, Deputy Speaker. The same people who told us climate change didn't matter are now saying that nuclear is the answer to it. The same people who delivered 0 large-scale generation projects in nearly a decade now want us to trust them with nuclear reactors when they're in opposition. They didn't support renewables when they had the chance, they're not serious about climate action now, and their nuclear push is not about getting energy in the system in the short term, it's about an ideology. It's about delaying action, it's about locking in fossil fuels for another generation. And don't take it from me, take it from the leader of the Nationals who admitted on radio that their plan is to sweat out coal assets into nuclear. In other words, run ageing coal power station as long as possible. They're unreliable, they break down, some are always out of action. And then just cross our fingers because nuclear, we promise, will show up one day in 2 or 3 decades' time. That's not a plan, that's a cover to extend the life of fossil fuels in our energy grid. Renewable energy is the path forward to solving our energy challenges. It's not a theory, it's not a hope, it's happening right now. It's delivering for households, businesses and communities across the country. It's not only the cheapest source of new power generation, it's also the quickest to dispatch. It's one of the safest to operate, and it's the most sustainable in reducing emissions. And when backed by storage, when backed by gas, which we can turn on or off when we don't need it, this smart investment in the grid is capable of delivering reliable and resilient power across the country, particularly for our manufacturers. Deputy Speaker, this report shows that we don't need to gamble on this technology in 20 to 30 years' time. We already have the tools to lower power bills, we have the tools to cut emissions, and we have the plan to get enough energy back in our system. Since we came to office in 2022, we've overseen a 25% increase in renewable electricity generation in the national electricity market. It's helping push down emissions, and as AEMO have said many times, it's helping put downward pressure on wholesale power prices. Emissions from the grid are now at record lows, and they will continue to go lower under Labor. We're building the transmission we need through our Rewiring the Nation programs. We're investing in batteries, both grid scale and in communities, just like in Bennelong at North Epping. And through our capacity investment scheme, we're unlocking over 32 gigawatts of new, clean, dispatchable energy. It's happening. Last year, 5.9 gigawatts in renewable energy generation, enough to power 1.7 million homes. Approved over 80 renewable energy projects, enough to power 10 million Australian homes. And in New South Wales alone, we've backed 6 dispatchable energy projects. And in Victoria and South Australia, investor interest has been so strong, we received 32 times more the bids than we needed. Households too are buying in on this. More than 330,000 rooftop solar installations in Australia last year. If it works on the small scale, it's going to work on a large scale as well, isn't it? And the more that we invest in this, the more returns our communities will get in lowering emissions and putting more of the cheapest form of new power in the grid. Then you get into the fact that nuclear is illegal in many states. There's that huge impediment there because it comes with baggage. There's the waste, there's the safety concerns, there's this distinct lack of social licence to do it. They never mention once in their 22 energy policies that they do nuclear. They're just doing it now because of their ideology. We reject it.
Thank you. The question is that the document be noted. I call the member for Ryan.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The Coalition wants you to believe nuclear is a magic solution that'll solve both our climate and energy woes. Here's why they're wrong. Nuclear is the most expensive form of energy generation. Renewables, wind and solar, backed by storage, are the cheapest, followed by coal, then gas, and then pricey nuclear. This is according to the CSIRO, whose analysis does include the cost of transition infrastructure. Nuclear takes decades to build. Construction of new plants is frequently delayed, such as in France, where their recent Flamanville 3 reactor came online after a 12-year delay and quadruple the amount of the initial cost estimate. And that's a country with already a well-established nuclear industry. The UK's Hinkley Point C nuclear energy facility, mentioned by the previous member, is costing 3 times more than promised and running 14 years late. In the US, a 7-year delay and double the cost for the Vogtle Unit 3 plant in Georgia. They have essentially stopped building new nuclear plants in the US because it's just not stacking up for the government or for private investors. So nuclear. When do we get it? Short answer, never. Never. 12-year delay, quadruple the initial cost estimate. That's the Flamanville 3 station in France. 14-year delay, triple the cost. That's the UK's Hinkley Point C reactor. 7-year delay, double the cost. That's the Vogtle Unit Plan 3 in the US. All countries with an existing nuclear industry. So the Leader of the Opposition reckons we'll get nuclear by 2035 and cost $331 billion. In the real world, however, where hopefully most of us reside, which it seems the LNP are increasingly detached from, nuclear in Australia will only start hitting our grid by sometime around 2050. And the cost? Well, triple the Coalition's optimistic assessment, up to $993 billion. In the real world, this just ain't gonna happen. It's a pipe dream. But let's say for the sake of argument, it goes ahead. We get nuclear by 2050. Well, in the intervening period, we'll have screwed up our chance to transition to 100% renewables because their plan involves delaying renewables construction and relying on ageing, expensive coal and gas in the interim. and even if we did get it, it would be 6% of our energy needs, and as the most expensive form of energy, drive up our power bills enormously. So, real-world scenario, this just never happens. And perhaps the Leader of the Opposition knows this. He's just wanting to play politics with our energy transition. Best case scenario, in 25 years we've got 6% of our energy covered by an incredibly expensive energy source, and we've completely turbocharged climate change in the meantime. Nuclear sounds just too good to be true, right? Just because it is. Nuclear is not only not as reliable as it's being touted by those trying to sell us this pup, but it's also not immune to the effects of climate change. Nuclear reactors rely on water to cool them, meaning they're vulnerable to droughts and even water that's simply too hot to cool the reactor, as has happened in France. Coastal reactors are vulnerable to, get this, and it sounds crazy, swarms of jellyfish clogging up their intake pipes because the acidification of the oceans due to climate change has turbocharged the jellyfish numbers. This has caused plant shutdowns across the globe, from Scotland to Japan to California. But perhaps most importantly, the Coalition's plan in the interim, in the intervening decades, before they could theoretically get nuclear going, is to delay renewables and keep us reliant on ageing, expensive coal and gas infrastructure that's cooking our planet. Thank you.
Thank you. The
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to say a few words about some of the comments made on this report.
The line has the call.
I gather there was a lot of work done, but I don't agree with all the conclusions. I just want to repeat a few reality checks. A lot of people are concerned about the cost, the delay in building them overseas, and that it's not the answer, that it's a stalking horse to keep coal and gas in the system, and that it uses way too much water, and that renewable energy is very affordable and it's cheap, and I just want to place some corrections on that. First of all, the state of Victoria and the state of New South Wales and Queensland are already relying on coal and gas, and they are subsidising the power stations to stay in. And it's not a secret plan of the Coalition. It's just a reality that 60% of the energy in Queensland, Victoria and New South Wales, roughly, if you follow the AEMO live generation, still 60 to 65% comes from coal. Because you can install all the gigawatts that the former member for Bennelong talked about, but the fact of the matter is they are all low capacity, randomly generating, and often they generate nothing or next to nothing. Like, capacity factor is how often an installed capacity actually generates. Now, everyone thinks, oh, Australia's so sunny, we'll have heaps of solar power. You know, like, well, there's light half the day, so it's at least 50%. But actually, averaged over a year, it's 24%. Because when it's light in the early morning, it's not generating, although it's light. In the dusk, it's not, because the sun isn't going straight onto the solar panels. When it's cloudy, it stops. When it's raining, it stops. When you have wet weeks and months, it stops. So you can install as much as you like. And because Australia is part of the world that has a north-south access for the biggest part of the national electricity market, and because of our native weather patterns, all these renewable generators are highly correlated. That means they all generate at the same time, and they generally, over vast distances, stop at the same time. And over-installing them doesn't mean that
you will get something that's available 24% of the time on average. If you build 4 times as much, you'll get it 100% of the time. It just means more and more installed capacity all stops at the one time. The second thing is all it needs is a lot of firming, and we are firming. Well, that's what New South Wales government is paying the power stations for. Firming is a euphemism for what you turn to when renewables are not generating. Now, at the moment, the New South Wales Labor government is subsidising the power stations to stay there because the market rules have sent them broke. They are designed, they're old plants, they are designed to get up to steam and spin a generator, which then generates electricity. And they're not designed to ramp up and ramp down. Some of the new nuclear plants can do that handsomely. BWX 300 that Canada's building. They can ramp from 45% up to 95% because the neutronics in these modern plants are great. You can go from 45% up to 95%. But backup is expensive because it is generally a low capacity factor utilisation. Like if you're having gas on standby and it sits there and it's only firing up when there's a shortage, it makes it a really inefficient gas power plant. The same for coal, the same for pumped hydro, the same for batteries. They are very expensive. Now, why are people's electricity bills going up and up, even though they've got rooftop solar? There are plenty of businesses that have got rooftop solar and batteries, yet their bills are still going up. And that is because in your bill stack, what makes up your bill, the electricity is the minority part of it. That's the wholesale cost of electricity. Now, it is low compared to the network costs, the poles and wires, all the synchronous condensers that you have to add to the system that utilise energy but don't generate energy, all the new poles and wires, the massive expansion, all these extra bits and pieces that you need on a renewables-based grid is what makes it expensive. Sure, they're cheap, but they're only cheap 24% of the time. But by giving them a red carpet ride onto the grid, they can do that because the market allows them to. They're not responsible for the other 75% of the time. And they also get other payments than what they get paid for their electricity. Like if you're a coal plant, unless you're selling electricity, you get diddly squat. You don't get paid anything. Same for gas. Same for, countries overseas. You can bid in the market, but you only get paid for your electricity, except if you're renewable. You can get a contract for difference, so your risk is reduced. You can get capacity investment scheme payments to get your facility up and built. You can get the whole public that pays for the grid in their bill. You can get the grid built for you, even though you're not near where the load is needed, because when we had a sensible engineering-based system, you had your load near where the generation was happening, and you had your fuel next to the load. So basically, firming is expensive, and also putting electricity into batteries, into a pumped hydro, from direct current into alternating current, sending it through the wires, then putting it into a battery energy storage system, and then taking it out, and then inverting it back into AC, and then getting it to your house, uses oodles of the energy you've just generated. Whereas in an alternating current generated system, it's AC to your house. So you can transmit alternating current hundreds of miles without much consumption of the electricity. This guy called Tesla, remember him? George Westinghouse, Thomas Edison. They had battles about this in the 1880s and 1890s because one guy was building a DC system and the other decided, no, this is crazy. You're losing all your energy. They had to build a direct current power station every 2 or 3 blocks in Chicago and New York because they couldn't transmit it. So Tesla came along and developed how to make alternating current. It's pretty easy. You have a big magnet intersecting an electromagnetic field, or copper wires intersecting the electromagnetic fields of a magnet, and hey presto, electrons come out the end of it. So how do you get a big 150-tonne magnet to spin around at 50 hertz a second? You boil water to produce steam, which spins the turbine, then spins the generator. Hey presto, that's what you got. Now that's what you get in nuclear. They are big. The Minister for Chris Bowen, Minister for Energy, said, oh, the Minister for Linus talked about nuclear is just a big kettle. Well, actually, a coal plant is just a big kettle. A closed cycle gas plant has a gas energy source which spins a turbine, but then it has a side channel that boils water so that you've got 2 bites of the energy to make more. So, ladies and gentlemen, the idea that you have a cheap system based on renewables is quite fallacious. It is not a cheap system. It's cheap when you've got it, but for the rest of the time, it makes the system unsustainable. And the International Energy Agency has written about this forever, since this renewable transition was proposed. And they said, look, up to 10%, it doesn't cost you much. It's just money for jam. You stick a wind tower up and, hey, presto, you have extra electricity. Same with the solar panel. But once you get into the double figures, all the integration costs, all the extra poles and wires, all the bits and pieces, all the inverters, all the batteries, all the pumped hydro, just sends you broke. Now, hey presto, that's what's happened to Germany. They have thousands of wind towers and they are about to start up their nuclear plants. Because if you have big baseload providers that can work with the existing renewables, hey presto, you don't have to rely on Russia, you can just rely on yourself. And Germany has worked that out the hard way. Yeah, and you can't get gas, so you need a constant. So, but we can get uranium and we can run a plant for 3 years. So a lot of this stuff is very faulty.
The member for Hunter.
I move that the debate now be adjourned.
Is the motion seconded? Oh.
Motion.
Yep. Okay. All in favour say aye. Aye. Against no? I think the ayes have it. Member for Hunter.
I move that the Federation Chamber do now adjourn.
I second the motion.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. All of those opinions say aye, of the contrary no. Aye. I think the ayes have it. The Federation Chamber stands adjourned until 9:30 a.m. on Thursday, the 27th of March 2025.